You ever hear a story so dark it makes your stomach turn? That's what I lived through. I'm not proud of it, but someone has to speak up, because too many people stayed silent for too long. There's this man, Chief Okonkwo. He's a big name in our town, the kind of man whose wealth speaks louder than anything else. Owns multiple shops, throws the biggest parties, and drives the latest cars. People bow when they see him. But behind all the glitter and wealth, there's something rotten, something I wish I never found out. Chief Okonkwo had a system. He'd travel to different states and find young boys, mostly from poor families, promising them and their parents a better future. Let your son work for me, he'd say. After 5 years, I'll settle him with enough money to start his own life. And the parents, desperate for a way out of poverty, would agree. They'd even sign agreements, thinking their sons were in good hands. I was one of those boys. I came from a small village in Enugu State. My father was a farmer, and when Chief Okonkwo came with his promises, it felt like a miracle. My parents believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was rich, respected, and seemed so generous. At first, things were fine. I worked in his shop, selling electronics and keeping the place clean. He was strict, sure, but that wasn't surprising. Then, about 6 months in, the nightmare began. One night, after everyone else had gone home, Chief called me into his office. He locked the door behind me and told me to sit down. His tone was calm, almost too calm, but his eyes were cold. He started talking about loyalty, about how I needed to prove I could be trusted. Before I could even understand what was happening, he stood up and walked over to me. He touched my shoulder and smiled. That smile still haunts me. "You do what I say, won't you?" he asked. When I didn't answer, he leaned closer and whispered, "If you don't, I'll send you back to your village. And not just that. I'll tell your parents you've been stealing from me. They'll believe me. Everyone will believe me." I was terrified. This was Chief Okonkwo, the man everyone respected. Who would believe me over him? That night, he did things I can't even talk about. And it didn't stop there. It became a regular thing. He'd call me to his office, lock the door, and take what he wanted. I couldn't say no. I couldn't fight back. If I even tried, he'd remind me how powerful he was, how easily he could ruin my life. I wasn't the only one. There were other boys, all trapped in the same nightmare. We'd avoid talking about it, but you could see the fear in everyone's eyes. Some tried to leave, but Chief always found a way to bring them back. If they refused to come back, he'd spread lies about them, accusing them of theft or worse. No one wanted to risk it. After the 5 years, when it was time for him to settle us, he'd find an excuse not to pay. For some, he'd claim they hadn't worked hard enough. For others, he'd accuse them of stealing or breaking his trust. No one ever got the money they were promised. Instead, they were sent back to their villages with nothing but shame and trauma. I lasted 3 years before I finally broke. One night, I packed my things and ran. I didn't care about the threats anymore. I couldn't take it. I made it back to my village and told my parents everything. At first, they didn't believe me. How could someone as respected as Chief Okonkwo do something so horrible? But when other boys started coming forward with the same stories, the truth began to spread. The problem was, Chief was too powerful. Even when people knew the truth, no one dared to confront him. He had money, connections, and a way of silencing anyone who tried to speak up. To this day, he's still out there, still doing the same thing. And the boys? Most of them stay silent, just like I did for so long. I don't know if this story will change anything, but I had to tell it. Maybe someone out there will read this and decide to fight back. Maybe someone stronger than me will finally bring Chief Okonkwo to justice. Until then, I keep praying for the boys still trapped in his web. They deserve better. We all did.